a president and his family have been subjected to such a heavy barrage of teasing and fun-poking and satire. I mean, there have been books on backstairs at the White House, and cartoon books with clever sayings, and photo albums with balloons and the rest, and now a smash hit record. Can you tell us whether you read and listen to these things and whether they produce annoyment or enjoyment?
Annoyment. No, they produce. Yes, I have read them and listened to them. Actually, I listened to Mr. Meader's record, but I thought it sounded more like Teddy than it did me. But
now down onto the floor for this week's press conference.
Yes, well, there is no opening statement. I think I will just take the first question.
Claude Smedley, Washington Daily Herald. Sir, would you comment on the African situation, please?
Well, now, I'm not up to date on that. Now, I sent a personal representative to Africa some months ago. So far, she hasn't even dropped me a card.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to This is the President. We wanted to try something a little different with this video. This is an audio interview I did with the legendary comedy writer Bob Booker, who, along with his business partner Earl Dowd, created one of the highest-selling, if not the highest-selling, comedy albums in United States history, The First Family. We actually did this interview with Bob way back in 2020, during the dark beginnings of the corona pandemic, so you'll hear a couple of corona references in there, but we decided to leave them in because they still felt relevant. So, without further ado, please enjoy the This is the President interview with Bob Booker. Tell me a little bit how you got started in the industry.
When I was a kid, I was a disc jockey on radio in Florida.
You had met a few comedian celebrities when you were working down there?
Yeah, they were all on my show. I had an afternoon 4 to 7 drive time thing, they called it. And of course, Miami was probably the biggest center for live entertainment on the East Coast then, with nightclubs, particularly during the season, the winter season when everybody got out of New York. So it was from Sinatra on down, every night. A lot of clubs, great city, different today.
At one point you relocated to New York City?
Right, I finally decided that to further the career, New York was the Mecca. That was the place where it was happening. And I was in television in Miami also. I was in television in Florida for a long time. I was in television in 1949. And to move on, I figured that New York was the place to go. And I really had been lucky enough to do pretty much everything I wanted to do in Miami. And I didn't want to sit there the rest of my life and just keep doing the same thing. So I moved on.
Right. And how did you meet Earl?
Through mutual friends in New York, and a lot of us, some Irish guys were involved in it. We'd go to the pubs in the afternoon or evening and sit around forming our own kind of round table and trading jokes. And Earl was just one of them, and we were both starving, so we got a few, week-to-week jobs and looking for the hit, like everybody else in the group was. So,
what was your concept for the hit, and how did that come about?
Well, first of all, as I say, I had spent so much time with the guys who had the comedy records, Lenny Bruce and Shelley Berman, Nichols and May, Jonathan Winters, my God, a ton of them. That was a big fashion here, the comedy album. And I just had the idea to, when Kennedy got elected, he was such a giant movie star president, and he had a tremendous sense of humor.
Mr. President, the Democratic platform in which you ran for election promises to work for equal rights for women, including equal pay, to wipe out job opportunity discriminations. Now, you have made efforts on behalf of others. What have you done for the women according to the promises of the platform?
Well, I'm sure we haven't done enough, and I must say I am a strong believer in equal pay for equal work, and I think that we ought to do better than we're doing, and I'm glad that you reminded me of it.
We said if we take this giant figure, this movie star president, and put him in everyday scenes, in other words, a fish out of water is what it is in comedic terms. You know, if you took Donald Trump and put him shopping in a grocery store line and tell him 6 feet back, buddy. You know, I mean, it immediately, you don't even need the jokes, you just need the situation. And all we had to do was find a Kennedy impersonator, and there were several of them around in those days. A guy named Dick Shawn, who was, Dick was doing it too, major guy.
What was it like working with Vaughan? Like, how did you know he would be the guy?
So I'm on a TV show called Talent Scouts.
Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scout.
One of the first popular talent shows, and we heard Vaughan do it, and found his manager. He only did it in the act for about 2 minutes at that time. He did it right at the end of it, but we had him in, and he was better than anybody. He had the voice down perfectly.
Now, just a minute. Who do you think you are? Now, let me say this about that. Number one, he's not an expert on politics, but I am. So if you'd like to ask any questions about anything in the world, we'll take the questions now and give you answers. Anyone at all.
And were you there for the recording of the album?
Yes, I'm in it.
Oh, you okay? All right.
Did you ever hear it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I listened to it. That's My Swan.
Right. Well, go back and
yes.
Did you ever listen to the White House tour?
Yeah, that was the one with that Jackie was giving.
Right. Listen to it again. That's me.
Good evening. This is Charles Collingsworth at the White House in Washington, D.C. For many of you, this will be your first visit to this historical landmark. Our tour through these hallowed halls will be conducted by the First Lady.
Good evening, Charles.
Good evening. Shall we begin here in the West Wing?
Yes.
That particular piece, the White House tour, which Vaughan was in maybe for 5 seconds, was the biggest played piece. It always bothered him. Didn't bother me. But she was so good, Naomi. She was excellent with that, Jackie.
I didn't realize until I listened to it that it was actually recorded live. Was there anything special that you remember that was going on that night when you recorded the album?
Yes, just before that was the famous Cuban speech of Kennedy's.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
And we were in a studio at that time. We had a TV set in the back room, and we had a live audience out in front who did not hear his speech. It's a rather famous speech. You probably heard it. So we went ahead and recorded it. 7:30. We figured that would go away and had nothing to do with what we were doing. It was proved to be true. The guy who owned the record company was frightened by it, but we weren't.
But I guess the studio audience had no idea what was going on.
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
And we did it it's done in one take, live audience, no laugh tracks put in. Those days you didn't do that. You did a joke, you either got a laugh or you didn't. One take, I'd say we did it in about 35, 40 minutes. You know, we're standing in microphones with scripts. It's not like making a live sitcom show. You know.
So could you tell me a little bit about the album sales? I mean, how quickly did it happen? I mean, what was that like?
It happened really in one day. It just exploded. It's funny. I was still working at a station in New York, which happened to have been the number one station, music station, WINS. And a buddy of mine was doing the afternoon show.
That was Stan Burns,
right,
as a
it
DJ.
was Stan. Yeah.
Thank you so much, WW, and how are all of you out there? This is Stan Burns welcoming you to another edition of Stan the Request Man. All your favorite records of yesteryear and today.
Earl and I, we got the first record. I said, let's go to WINS. And he was about to go on the air. I told him what we had, and he put it on in a small room, heard the first piece, and he said, I'll play it first up. So he played the entire album all the way through. Every phone lit up, it went crazy. But he played the album for 3 hours continuously. I've never heard of anybody doing that. People were tuning it in, thinking it was Kennedy, some people. But to them it was funny. So it became what I call a hula hoop. You know, this week's thing you got to own before your neighbor does. It was obviously going to hit because, Stan picked it up, but immediately every station in New York picked it up. And, there are no secrets. And it's like news today, how fast it travels.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's interesting because also, like, people didn't really impersonate the president at the time, It wasn't a big deal. Like, you couldn't really impersonate Eisenhower.
No.
Meader was from up in the Northwest somewhere.
He was from Boston.
He kind of
Boston.
Yeah, okay.
And that's where the accent came from. He'd gone to school there pretty much not in the same area that Jack Kennedy grew up in. That was, more elite. But the accent was there. Sometimes when I talked to Vaughan on the phone, you would swear it was Kennedy.
Yeah, it is pretty good, and I think that was the thing that was frightening to the Kennedy staffers. They were saying, because he does sound like the president, and it sounds like the president is doing a commercial
Absolutely.
For a local radio station.
We were lucky enough that Kennedy loved the album because the guys around Kennedy tried to stop it.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. So I actually pulled up, I did some research over at the JFK library, and I actually found a couple of memos. Like Arthur Schlesinger wrote a memo about hearing the album for the first time, and he almost drove off the road.
Right.
And then there's another memo where I'll read you one line from it. And he's saying, the president discussed this album with me on Monday and also with Ken O'Donnell. It was more or less agreed that nothing could be done about this particular record.
Right. That's funny. I'll tell you the truth. There was the head press guy in the White House was a man named Merriman Smith. And he was an idol in the press business here when it's before fake news came into popularity. And Merriman, I'd never met him. I knew who he was. In fact, he's the man who actually called in Kennedy's death. And he was a very good friend of Jack's. And he called me about 2 days after the album was out. And he said, Bob, do you know who I am? I said, yes, I know who you are. He said, he loves it. He absolutely loves it. And he said, I'm telling you this on the side because I know they're going to hit at you, and try and stop it. Just because they give him something to do, I guess. But Kennedy bought 100 copies as Christmas gifts for people.
How many albums did you guys wind up selling? I mean, what was the final figure on that?
7.5 million. It's probably a little more. Well, It was put back out on the 50th anniversary, and I don't even know that count in front of me. I didn't keep track of it that much. I'd say probably 8 million totally by now. Then we went on tour with it in January.
Yeah, I was going to ask about, because I found a bunch of, I was digging through some newspapers, and I found the newspaper ads. So what kind of places did you guys play?
Well, we opened in Carnegie Hall, which I must say the press were kind of surprised that we would open in such a distinguished spot. But the album was hot, and it was just January. We'd already sold 7.5 million copies of it in 6 weeks. So we put it together and opened the show and then traveled to cities, Boston, Detroit. Ended up in Vegas about 3 or 4 months later for the final, I guess we played a month in Vegas with it. It was a show, a show with actors, and we had an opening musical act and such.
And you were on stage performing?
No. After the album, Earl and I got too damn busy to do it, and we had a deal with Vaughan to do a second album. So we started writing it. In fact, we were lucky. While we were on tour, I traveled with the show, and we would put the new pieces in and try them out in audiences along the way. So we pretty much knew what worked and what didn't before we got the second album.
And that was it was just Volume 2, I believe it was called, or something. Yeah.
I must say the nicest compliment I think that we were ever paid, the New York Times, and which I'm not a fan of the New York Times, but but I was at that time, and they said that seldom, if ever, is number 2 of anything better than number 1. But they said that the second volume was better than the first. So that was a nice opinion anyway, T.
Oh.
A dark page in the annals of America has been written to the crack of an assassin's bullet. A nation mourns, the world grieves. The man who became 35th president less than 3 years ago is dead.
November 1963. That was obviously kind of the end. What was your thoughts about that time?
Saddest day of my life that I remember, not my personal life, but my business life. Mm-hmm. I loved the man. I thought he was such a promise for this country, and now we'll never know. I had a very funny hearing of it. I was having lunch with, I don't know if you know who Allen Ginsberg was.
Of course, yeah. Wow.
And
okay.
Bob Dylan, and 3 of us were having lunch downtown in the Village project I was working on. And I got a call from my secretary, and she said, Kennedy's been shot. He was not instantly dead, as far as news was concerned. They said he'd been shot, and they didn't know. So I just threw some money on the table, told the guys, and got a cab. Went to the office for the TV. Sad day. Sad. It's one of the few things in this country that everybody remembers. It's like this virus thing is going to be remembered in another sense. But you can ask most any person, where were you when Kennedy died? Of course, there are very few left. I'm just lucky enough to be a little older.
So how did the president's assassination affect what you guys did with the album?
Well, I went immediately to the phone, but by the time I got back to the office, Kennedy was gone, and I called Archie Blyer, who owned the record label, Cadence Records. And I don't know if you know who Blyer was, but he was a very well-known musician and record boss. And I said, I want no part whatsoever in cashing in on this. And I know it's going to go crazy. That people are going to want it. I don't want to make money off of Jack Kennedy's death. And I said I would like to have all the albums pulled back and chopped up, and they did it. In fact, he felt the same the minute I told him. I said, "You're right, Bob. I don't want it either. It's not fair, you know. I mean, Mike, come on."
Yeah, that's I totally understand.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a very honorable thing.
Well, it's just human right. I mean, it's like I wouldn't buy stock in any company today trying to cash in on the virus business. You know, and there's a lot of it here in America. You've never seen so many different masks and lotions for your hands and rip-offs. Right, I wouldn't buy stock in one of those companies or anything as an endorsement.
When was the last time that you talked to Vaughan?
I would say maybe 6 months before he passed away. Vaughan and I were not close friends. I mean, we just he was an actor that had worked for us, and it wasn't a social thing at all.
Right.
So I felt very sorry for the fact that he was so stuck with the imitation that the career was over. I know that I didn't know he tried a few things after that. I'm not really sure what they are. As I said, I didn't talk to him a lot. And his wife called me. I don't know how she found me, but the current wife called me the day he died, and there had been no word of it, so I called all the press people because I thought that he deserved that, proper goodbye. So Associated Press and all of them jumped on it. So it was a nice story of his career and such.
Interesting to talk to people with some great stories, and thank you for your time.
Sure thing. Thanks very much. Take care of yourself. Bye.
All right, bye, Bob.